There is a particular kind of silence that follows a threat delivered at a dinner table. Not the silence of shock, not the silence of a man who has been wounded and doesn't know where to press. The silence of a man who has already decided what he's going to do, and understands that the person sitting across from him has absolutely no idea what's coming. That was the silence I gave Marcus Webb on a Sunday evening in October, in the dining room of the house I built with my own hands, at a table I had sat at for 31 years, in front of my daughter, my grandchildren, and a pot roast that deserved better than the conversation that interrupted it. I am Gerald Booth. I am 67 years old. I spent 34 years as a structural contractor in Charlotte, North Carolina, building things that were meant to stand. Foundations, load-bearing walls, structures designed to hold weight that other people underestimated. I know what it takes to make something permanent. I also know, better than most, what happens when someone builds on a foundation they've deliberately weakened. I'm going to tell you what Marcus said that evening. I'm going to tell you what I did about it. And I'm going to tell you about the 30 days in between, because that's where the real story lives. Not in the explosion, in the quiet before it. But first, I need to tell you about the house. The house on Caldwell Creek Road sits on 2.3 acres, just outside of Concord, North Carolina, about 22 miles northeast of Charlotte. I bought the land in 1991 for $43,000, which was everything I had at the time, and then a little more that I borrowed from my father, a man named Earl Booth, who spent 40 years working the line at a textile mill in Kannapolis, and who handed me a check with a steadiness that told me he believed in me before I fully believed in myself. I paid him back inside of 2 years. I want that noted. I poured the foundation myself that spring, with 2 men I had worked with for years, brothers named Darnell and Curtis Peoples, who showed up at 5:30 in the morning on a Saturday in April, and didn't leave until the concrete was right. We built that foundation to last 100 years. I know because I was the one who spec'd it, and I didn't cut a single corner even when the budget said I should. My wife Evelyn and I moved in with our 2 daughters in the summer of 1993. Renee was 9, Claudia was 6. Evelyn planted a vegetable garden along the south fence that first fall. Tomatoes, green beans, summer squash. She said the land needed to know we intended to stay. We intended to stay. Evelyn passed, in 2018, from a cancer that moved faster than anyone was prepared for. 15 months from diagnosis to the morning I sat in that garden she had planted, and understood for the first time in my life what it meant to be truly alone inside a place you loved. The house didn't stop being home. It became more home than it had ever been, because it was the last place she was fully herself, the last place her hands had touched every wall, every window ledge, every door frame. I was not going to be moved out of it by a man I had given a $90,000 business loan to 3 years earlier. I want you to hold that number. $90,000. We're going to come back to it. Before I get any further, I want to say something directly to the people watching this right now. If you are new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and join this community, because the stories we tell here are about real people, real choices, and real consequences. They're about what happens when decent men and women decide they are done being taken for granted. Drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I want to know who's out there. Your city, your country. Just say hello. And while you're down there, hit that like button. It costs you nothing, and it means everything. Now, let me tell you about Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb came into our family the way most things that eventually cause damage do. Slowly, pleasantly, and with excellent manners. He met my younger daughter Claudia at a church social in the spring of 2014. She was 27, teaching elementary school in Concord, living in a rental apartment on Spring Street and saving money with the focused discipline of a woman who had watched her father build something from nothing and understood what that required. Marcus was 31, working in sales for a commercial flooring company, recently relocated from Raleigh, and possessed of the kind of easy confidence that reads as competence until you spend enough time around it to see what's underneath. He was tall. He dressed well. He called me Mr. Booth until I told him to stop, and then he switched to Gerald with the particular warmth of a man who knew that first names meant he'd cleared a hurdle. Claudia loved him. I saw it immediately. the way she straightened when he entered a room, the way she laughed at things he said a half second before other people, not because she was performing but because she genuinely found him funny. My daughter had her mother's heart, open and trusting and fully given once she decided to give it. That quality had always made me proud of her, and quietly protective in equal measure. They married in June of 2016. The wedding was at First Baptist Church on Union Street. I walked Claudia down the aisle, in a suit I'd had made, because nothing off the rack felt right for that morning. She wore her mother's veil. I had held it together all the way to the altar, and then completely lost myself when the organist started playing, and I looked at my daughter's face. Marcus shook my hand at the altar, and looked me in the eye, and I thought, this is a good man. I want to be honest about that. I believed it. I had no reason not to believe it. I want to be clear about something before I continue. What I'm about to tell you is not the story of a man who was always suspicious and simply waited to be proven right. It is the story of a man who trusted completely, gave generously, and paid attention slowly enough that by the time the pattern was visible, the pattern was already in my house. The first 2 years of the marriage were fine. Marcus and Claudia rented a townhouse in Kannapolis. They had their first child, a boy they named Eli, in 2017. I was at the hospital at 4 in the morning when that boy was born, and I held him while Claudia slept, and I thought about my father holding me, and the line of it, the long, unbroken line of men trying to do right by what they helped make. The problems with Marcus didn't announce themselves. They arrived the way drafts arrive in old houses, not through one broken window, but through 100 small gaps you didn't think to seal. He changed jobs 3 times in 4 years, each time with a reasonable explanation. The flooring company restructured. The new position in logistics wasn't what they'd described. The regional sales role had unrealistic targets. Each reason was plausible. Each transition period stretched a little longer than the one before it. Claudia's teacher salary carried more of the household weight each time, and Marcus never seemed to notice the weight shifting, or if he noticed, he never mentioned it. When their second child, a girl they named Laurel, was born in 2019, the same month I lost Evelyn, Marcus was between positions. He had been between positions for 4 months. I was burying my wife and my son-in-law was updating his LinkedIn profile, and I kept those 2 facts in separate rooms in my mind, because grief requires that kind of internal architecture sometimes. At the funeral, Marcus gave a beautiful eulogy for Evelyn. He said all the right things. He cried at the right moments. My older daughter, Renee, who has always been the sharper-eyed of my 2 daughters, caught my arm afterward in the parking lot and said, "Dad, I know this isn't the time, but watch him." I told her she was being unfair. I should have listened. In the summer of 2021, Marcus came to me with an idea. He sat across from me at this same dining room table on a Thursday evening after dinner, after Claudia had taken the children upstairs, and he laid out a business plan for a commercial cleaning company targeting industrial facilities and mid-sized office parks in the greater Charlotte metro area. He had typed it up, 12 pages, tabs, projected revenue figures for years 1 through 3. I'll give him this. The plan was not bad. The market analysis was reasonable. The startup cost projections were realistic if a little optimistic. The revenue targets for year 2 were aggressive but not impossible, given the right contracts. He needed $90,000 to cover equipment, a vehicle, initial liability insurance, and 6 months of operating costs, while the business built its client base. He was asking me to be his investor. I sat with that document for a week. I called my accountant of 22 years, a man named Vincent Cole, who had the particular gift of never telling you what you wanted to hear. His verdict was plain. The risk is entirely on you, Gerald. If this business doesn't work, you are out $90,000, and he is out a bad idea. Those are not equivalent positions. I knew Vincent was right. I also knew that Claudia and Marcus had 2 children, a townhouse with rent that was eating half their income, and a husband who had not held a stable position in 4 years. I thought about my father and the check he handed me in 1991. I wrote Marcus a check for $90,000 on July 14, 2021. I did not call it a gift. I called it a loan. I had Howard Whitfield, my attorney of 19 years, draw up a simple loan agreement. 5% interest. repayment beginning at month 18, monthly installments over 5 years. Marcus signed it. He shook my hand. His eyes were wet. He said, "Gerald, I will not let you down." I believed him, because I wanted the story to be true. I wanted Marcus to be the man who needed one chance, and then became something. I had given my daughters a life built on that principle. I believed Marcus was built the same way. He was not. Clean Pro Commercial Services got off the ground in the fall of 2021. 2 contracts in the first 3 months. Claudia was cautiously optimistic. Even Renee said, "Okay, maybe." Month 6, the first contract wasn't renewed. Plausible. Month 9, the second was suspended. Also plausible. Month 12, Marcus told me the business was finding its footing and repayment needed to be deferred. He was confident. He had leads. I agreed to the deferral and said nothing to Claudia because Marcus asked me not to. I honored that because I still believed the man could find his footing. That was the mistake I will spend the most time accounting for, not the $90,000. The silence, the protecting of a man who was not protecting my daughter. Month 16, Marcus mentioned in passing that they had found a house they wanted to buy, a 4-bedroom in Briarwood Estates in Concord. Good schools, pre-approved. He said it casually, the way you mention weather. I remember thinking, on what income? The business was not yet cash flow positive. I didn't ask. I should have asked. Month 18, repayment was supposed to begin. Marcus asked for another deferral. The warmth was still in his posture, but something underneath it had shifted. The way a load-bearing wall can look fine from the outside, while the structure behind it is separating. I deferred again. I told Howard. Howard said, "Gerald, document everything." I began documenting. In the spring of 2023, Marcus and Claudia moved into the Briarwood Estates house. I found out how they'd managed the down payment 4 months later, when Claudia mentioned in passing that Marcus had taken a loan against the business assets. The business assets, which, if you were tracking, still included $90,000 of my capital as its primary funding source. I did not react. I called Howard that evening and told him what I'd learned. He said, "Gerald, pull together every piece of paper, every text, every email, every conversation. We need to understand what we're actually looking at. But I want to tell you when I truly understood it. Not when the documents told me. When Marcus stood up at that dinner table. Let me set the scene exactly. Sunday, October 8th, 2023. I had invited Claudia, Marcus, Eli, and Laurel to dinner at the house on Caldwell Creek Road, the same as I did most Sundays. Because after Evelyn died, Sundays without family in this house felt like a room with all the furniture removed. Just walls and space where warmth used to be. I had made pot roast, Evelyn's recipe, the one with the carrots and small white onions, and a cup of red wine in the braising liquid that she always said was the detail most people skipped and shouldn't. I had made it correctly. I want that on the record. Renee had driven down from Greensboro. That was unusual for a regular Sunday. She'd called me Friday evening and said she wanted to be there. No particular reason given. I knew there was a reason. Renee always has a reason. We ate well. The children were good. Eli, who was 6, had developed a strong interest in dinosaurs and delivered an unprompted 8-minute presentation on the Cretaceous period while we passed the rolls. Laurel, who was 4, ate 3 dinner rolls and 1 bite of pot roast and declared herself full, which is the prerogative of 4-year-olds, and I fully supported it. After dinner, after the children had been excused to the living room with a movie, Marcus pushed his plate back. He straightened in his chair, and I recognized something in his posture that I can only describe now in retrospect as a man who had rehearsed something and was deciding whether to say it. He said it. Gerald. He used my name the way someone uses a name when they want to establish that they are speaking to you as an equal rather than a son-in-law. Gerald, Claudia and I have been talking. He glanced at Claudia. She was looking at her water glass. He looked back at me. This house is too big for one person. The upkeep, the land, all of it, and honestly, with the kids getting older, we need more space. I looked at him. I said nothing. He continued. We've been thinking it makes the most sense for us to move in here. Take over the property. You could move somewhere smaller. Something easier to manage at your age. He paused. This house should be in our names now. It makes sense for the family. There was a silence. Then he said it again, this time with the particular firmness of a man who has decided that the silence means hesitation rather than decision. Gerald, it's time. This house belongs to us now. Old man, it's time to leave. Old man. I want you to sit with those two words. In the house I poured the foundation for. At the table I had built with my own hands, from reclaimed oak I'd salvaged from a demolished schoolhouse in Cabarrus County. Old man. I looked at Marcus Webb for a long moment. Then I smiled. I want to describe that smile accurately because it has been described to me by Renee, who was sitting across the table, and whose expression during all of this I was unfortunately not able to observe firsthand. She told me later that it was the quietest, most dangerous smile she had ever seen on a human face, that it looked like the smile of a man who had been waiting for someone to say something out loud for a very long time, and was deeply grateful they finally had. That is an accurate description. Thank you, Marcus, I said. I appreciate the clarity. And then I picked up my fork and finished my pot roast. Claudia said almost nothing during Marcus's speech. She sat very still. She had known this was coming. I could see it in the way she held her glass. The practiced stillness of a woman who has been told a plan and has been living with the discomfort of it, and has not yet found her footing on what she actually believes. That mattered to me. Not what Marcus had said, what Claudia had not said. After dinner, after Marcus had taken the children to the car, Renee and I stood in the kitchen, and she looked at me with the expression she has worn since she was 12 years old, when she wants to confirm that she and I are seeing the same thing. Dad, I know, I said. He's been planning this. I know. Claudia didn't stop him. I know that too. She came around the island and stood next to me. We both looked out the kitchen window at Evelyn's garden in the October dark. He doesn't know what you have, does he? Renee said. No, I told her. He doesn't. She nodded slowly. Good. I hugged my daughter goodnight. I watched her taillights disappear down Caldwell Creek Road. Then I locked the door, went to my study, and picked up the phone. I called Howard Whitfield at 8:47 on a Sunday evening. Howard answered on the second ring, because that is what Howard does. He said it out loud? Howard asked when I finished. At my dinner table, in front of witnesses. A pause. That was not a smart man's move. No, I said. It was not. Howard said, give me until Tuesday. I'm going to pull every document we have, and I want to make you an appointment with someone else as well. Who? My brother-in-law. He's been a CPA for 31 years. We need to look at that business loan from a different angle. I told Howard to make the call. Then I sat in my study in the quiet of the house that Marcus Webb had just told me to leave, and I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and took out a folder I had been building quietly for 7 months, and I started reading. Marcus didn't know what I had in that folder. 7 months of documentation. The original loan agreement, signed and notarized. Every text, every email, every verbal conversation, logged the same evening it happened. Bank records, deferral agreements, and a red subfolder in the back that was going to become very important. Howard's brother-in-law was a CPA named Kenneth Frazier. He met with me Wednesday morning, October 11th, spread the documents across his desk, and spent 45 minutes not saying much. Then he looked up. Gerald, he said, this business has not paid a single dime toward your loan. I know, but it has been paying other things. Look at this. Marcus had drawn a salary from the business from month 3. Not a modest one, $5,800 a month. Marcus had expensed a vehicle, not the company van, a personal SUV, a 2022 model, registered in his name but paid for through the business account. Marcus had taken 2 what the records listed as client development trips, one to Miami and one to Nashville, with no documented client meetings attached to either. The Briarwood Estates down payment, which Claudia had mentioned, was from a loan against business assets, was listed in the business records as a capital distribution. The business, Kenneth told me, has not been building toward repaying you. It has been funding Marcus Webb's personal life since approximately month 4 of operation. How much? I asked. Kenneth looked at his notes. In traceable expenditures that fall outside the scope of legitimate business operations, he said. In addition to the unpaid loan principal and accrued interest, we're looking at approximately $141,000 that has been consumed by this business in ways that directly benefited Marcus Webb personally and were never disclosed to you as the primary investor. I looked at that number, $141,000. I wrote it in my notebook. Then I wrote $90,000 under it. Then I drew a line under both and wrote $231,000. That was what Marcus Webb's confidence had cost. I want to stop here for a moment. When I drove home from Kenneth Fraser's office, I did not feel rage. Rage is what happens when you are surprised. I was not surprised. The surprise had happened earlier, quietly, in the spring, when I first looked at the bank records and felt the cold of a man who has been lied to carefully and over time. What I felt was the clarity that comes after a long diagnosis. You finally have the name for what you've been watching. The name is terrible, but now you know what you're dealing with, and you can act. What I needed most in that moment was to understand Claudia. She was married to this man. She had 2 children with him. She had sat at my table while he gave that speech and said almost nothing. Before I moved a single piece on this board, I needed to know where she stood. I called Renee. Renee, I need you to talk to your sister. What am I asking her? Nothing directly. I said just spend time with her. Take her to lunch. Listen. Tell me what you hear. Renee was quiet for a moment. Dad, what did Kenneth find? Enough. Just go see your sister. Renee took Claudia to lunch on Friday, October 13th, at a place called Harvest Moon Grill on Union Street that they had been going to since they were in their 20s. She texted me afterward, "Call me tonight." I called her at 8 o'clock. She doesn't know the numbers, Renee said. She knows the business hasn't been doing great. She knows the loan hasn't been repaid. Marcus has told her it's slow but building. She doesn't know about the distributions or the expenses. She thinks the SUV was a company vehicle. Does she know what he said to me at dinner? About the house. She knows he raised it. She told me she didn't think you'd take it that way. What way? She thinks Marcus was suggesting a family arrangement. That you'd all live here together. I sat with that. He said it was time for me to leave, Renee. He called me an old man and told me this house belonged to them now. That is not a suggestion about a family arrangement. I know that, Dad. She was quiet. I told her about what he actually said. How did she respond? Renee didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was careful. She cried. She said Marcus told her it would land differently, that he said you'd understand. I looked at Evelyn's lilac bush through the kitchen window. It was October, and the blooms were long gone, but the structure of it was still there. The branches she'd pruned herself for 25 years, shaped the way she wanted it. She didn't know, I said, about what he planned to say. She knew something. Renee's voice was careful. She didn't know the version he actually delivered. That distinction mattered. It changed the shape of what I was going to do. I am going to tell you about the 30 days. Not all of them, because some of what happened in those 30 days is still in the hands of an attorney, and I'm not in the business of speculating about ongoing legal matters. But I'm going to tell you what you need to know about who Marcus Webb found out he was dealing with. Monday, October 16th. Howard Whitfield filed a formal demand letter to Marcus Webb on behalf of Gerald H. Booth, demanding full repayment of the outstanding loan principal of $90,000, plus 18 months of accrued interest, and requesting a full accounting of CleanPro Commercial Services financial records, as stipulated in paragraph 7 of the original loan agreement, which Marcus had signed, and which he had apparently not read carefully enough. Paragraph 7. Howard had insisted on it in 2021. I hadn't thought I'd need it. It gave me the right to request a full financial audit of the business at any time, with 10 days' notice. Marcus called me 4 minutes after receiving the letter. I let it go to voicemail. His voice on the voicemail was confident, even a little amused, the voice of a man who does not yet understand the room he is standing in. Gerald, man, I think there's been a miscommunication. Call me back and we can straighten this out. This is family. We don't need attorneys. We don't need attorneys. I listened to that voicemail 3 times. Not because I needed to hear it again, Because I wanted to remember exactly what a man sounds like when he believes his charm is still his best asset. I texted Howard. He called. Let the letter stand. Howard, I know. His attorney called us this afternoon. His attorney. Marcus had an attorney on speed dial, which told me something I had been wondering about for some time. This had not been entirely spontaneous. Thursday, October 19th. Kenneth Frazier delivered his full accounting report on Clean Pro Commercial Services to Howard's office. 31 pages. Itemized. 3 years of financial records examined line by line. The report was worse than the preliminary numbers. In addition to the $90,000 in unpaid loan principal, Kenneth had identified what he classified as misappropriation of investor capital, totaling, across all traceable transactions, $168,000. The number had grown from $141,000 because Kenneth had found 2 additional capital distributions in the most recent quarter that had not been in the initial records pull. I am not a dramatic man by nature. I spent 34 years in an industry where underreaction is a professional virtue, where the correct response to discovering a structural problem is not panic, but assessment, documentation, and a plan. So when I sat with Kenneth's report at my kitchen table on a Thursday evening in October, and understood that the man who had called me old man at my own table had used my $90,000 check as the seed for what amounted to a $168,000 personal subsidy, what I felt was not rage and not satisfaction. What I felt was the cold, clarifying resolve of a man who has identified the full extent of a structural failure and knows exactly what needs to happen next. I wrote Marcus Webb's name at the top of a clean page in my notebook. Then I wrote what I knew. Then I wrote what I could prove. Then I wrote what I was going to do about it. That list took up 4 pages. Friday, October 20th. I drove to Briarwood Estates. Not to see Marcus, to see Claudia. She looked at my face when she opened the door and stepped back to let me in without a word. We stood in the kitchen and I set Kenneth's report on the counter. I need you to look at this before Marcus gets home. All of it. She read it standing there for 22 minutes. I counted. I didn't say a word. When she finished, she pressed both palms flat on the counter. She didn't cry. Claudia has always been the one who doesn't cry until she's alone. How bad is this for him? She asked. I told her. The loan, the audit, the misappropriation. Then I told her what Marcus had actually said at my table, word for word. Including old man, including it's time to leave. Her jaw tightened. He told me it would land differently, that you'd understand. That is not what he said, Claudia. I know, she said quietly. I think I knew at the table. She looked up with something in her eyes I had seen in her mother's face once. The look of a woman who has arrived at an answer she doesn't like but can live with. What do you need from me? She said. The truth. About what you knew and when. She told me everything. She'd known the loan was in default. She hadn't known the full financial picture. She had known Marcus planned to raise the house question. She hadn't known what he would actually say. And she had, she told me, been consulting a family attorney of her own for 6 weeks. I'm not sure I know who he is anymore, Dad. I covered her hand with mine. You know who you are. That's what matters. She squeezed once. Okay, what do? We do this correctly. And we do it together. Before I tell you what happened in the final days of those 30 days, I want to stop and say something to the people who've been watching this. If there's a story in your own family that this is pulling something loose in, if there is someone in your life right now who is taking more than they were given and building on a foundation that wasn't theirs to build on, leave it in the comments. Not for advice, not for judgment, just because sometimes the most important thing a person can do is say out loud what they've been carrying quietly. You are not alone in this. And the people who underestimate you because of your age, because of your silence, because you've been generous, and they've confused generosity with weakness, those people are almost always wrong about who they're dealing with. Say your story. I read every comment. The second week of November, Marcus's attorney tried 2 arguments. First, that the loan had been a gift and the signed agreement was unenforceable. Howard sent Kenneth's report on Monday. That argument was withdrawn by Wednesday. Second, that the business losses were force majeure. Howard's response itemized every personal expenditure in the records, noting that force majeure does not cover privately funded vacations or a personal SUV registered in the borrower's name. Marcus's attorney went quiet for 4 days. Claudia had retained her own attorney, a family law specialist in Cabarrus County. I did not involve myself in her decisions. She was 36 years old with 2 children and a clear picture of what she was dealing with. Those decisions belonged to her. What I can tell you is that I was at that house every Sunday. For Eli and Laurel, who needed their grandfather at the table, dinosaur conversations and all. November 7th, 2023. 29 days after Marcus stood up at my dinner table and told me it was time to leave. Howard called me at 9:15 in the morning. Gerald. His voice had in it the particular quality of a man who is controlling his satisfaction but not entirely succeeding. Tell me. Ellison called this morning. His client has agreed to a full settlement. The original principal plus accrued interest, plus Kenneth's documented figure for misappropriated funds. The full number? Howard named a figure. I won't put it in this story because it's still subject to a confidentiality provision, but I will tell you that the number was not small and that it covered what I had put in and then some, because by the time you add interest, documentation costs, attorney fees, and the accountability that Kenneth's audit established, the man who told me to leave my own house ended up paying for that instruction at a level he had not anticipated. How is he paying it? I asked. He's liquidating the business, whatever assets are there, and there's a personal guarantee component that extends to the Briarwood Estates property. I sat with that. The Briarwood house. Yes. I thought about that down payment, the one Marcus had pulled from my business loan as a capital distribution and used to buy a house in a neighborhood called Briarwood Estates, while telling Claudia it was a business maneuver, and telling me the business was building toward repayment. The house he had bought with my money was going to be part of how he paid me back. There is something almost elegant about that, in the terrible way that certain kinds of justice are almost elegant. Howard, I said. Yes. Make sure Claudia's attorney is aware of the timeline on the Briarwood property. Already called her this morning. Good. A pause. Gerald, Howard said, you've been patient about this for a long time. I told him. I spent 34 years in structural work. You don't rush a demolition. He laughed. Then we got off the phone. November 8th, 2023, day 30. I drove to Caldwell Creek Road, my road, to my house, and I parked in my driveway, and I sat for a moment, looking at the structure I had built in 1993, with Darnell and Curtis Peoples on a Saturday in April, when the concrete was cold and the air smelled like spring soil and possibility. I thought about my father's check. I thought about Evelyn planting the vegetable garden because the land needed to know we intended to stay. I thought about Eli explaining the Cretaceous period while we passed the dinner rolls. I thought about Marcus Webb at that table, in the chair I had sat in for 31 years, and the confidence in his voice when he said what he said, the perfect confidence of a man who had not stopped to consider whether the man across from him might know something he didn't. I got out of the car. I unlocked my front door. I went inside. I put on a pot of coffee. Then I sat down at my kitchen table, my table, built from reclaimed oak from a schoolhouse in Cabarrus County, and I opened my notebook to a clean page. At the top I wrote, what I know about building. And I wrote this. The most important thing about a foundation is not what it can hold. It is what it refuses to be moved by. 30 years of weather, of weight, of people who didn't build it, telling you it should be something else. A proper foundation doesn't argue. It doesn't explain itself. It simply holds the line. I had held the line. Here is where things stand. Claudia and Marcus separated in January 2024. She is still at the Briarwood Estates house, the children's stability protected by the legal arrangement her attorney negotiated. Marcus is in an apartment in Cabarrus County, navigating the financial consequences of his own arithmetic. I do not feel simple satisfaction about that. Marcus is still Eli's father and Laurel's father, and those 2 children will spend their lives in a family landscape more complicated than it should have been. That cost belongs on the ledger too. Renee drives down from Greensboro most Sundays. Claudia called me in February to tell me about a quiet new boy in her class who didn't know anyone, and how she'd asked Eli to show him around at lunch. Eli stood up and waved him over without hesitation. I told her she was raising him right. She said she had a good example. Marcus Webb looked at a 67-year-old retired contractor who made pot roast on Sundays and tended his late wife's garden in the evenings, and he saw a man who could be moved, told to leave, and who would find his things and go. He did not see a man who had spent 34 years building things that were meant to stand. He did not see a man who had been documenting for 7 months. He did not see Paragraph 7, or Kenneth Frazier, or the patience of someone who has been through real loss and understands the difference between a setback and a catastrophe. He saw an old man. He was wrong about what that meant. To anyone watching this who has been told your time has passed, that you should make way, that you are easier to move than you look, you are not easier to move than you look. The foundations you have poured, the structures raised through decades of work and grief and always showing up, those do not become less solid because someone young and confident decided to stand at your table and demand them. Hold the line. Document everything. Know who you are. The people who underestimate you have done you an enormous favor. They told you exactly where they stand. That information is yours to use. The lilacs bloomed again in April. Same as every year. Same as they always do. I was in the garden on a Tuesday morning in April when I heard a car in the driveway. Eli came running around the side of the house before I heard a door close, because Eli always runs, the way children run when the destination is somewhere they want to be. "Grandpa, he hit me at approximately the velocity of a small freight train. I caught him and lifted him and held him, and he smelled like grass and something that might have been ketchup, and I did not investigate further. What are we doing today?" he said. I set him down and looked at him, my daughter's eyes, my wife's laugh already forming around the edges of his face as he grows into it. "I thought we'd work on the garden," I told him. "Your grandmother planted this. I want to show you how she did it." He looked at the lilac bushes with the focused expression of a 6-year-old being given important information. "So we can keep it growing?" he said. "Exactly," I told him. "So we can keep it growing." We knelt down together in the garden on Caldwell Creek Road, on the land I bought in 1991 with my father's check and my own determination, and we got our hands in the soil, and the morning opened up around us the way mornings do in April in North Carolina, slow and warm, and full of the particular grace of things beginning again. I am 67 years old. I am not going anywhere. If this story found you at the right moment, if something in it settled something in you that needed settling, then do something simple. Hit that like button before you leave. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss what comes next, because there are more stories here, more real ones, more men and women who held the line when someone told them to move, and every one of them deserves to be heard. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Tell me your city, your country. And if this story pulled something loose in you, if there's something in your own life you've been carrying quietly, say it down there. You don't have to carry it alone. This community was built for exactly that. I'm Gerald Booth. I'm 67 years old, and this is my house. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. Please note, scripts developed with AI writing assistance, narrated and produced by our team.